The 4 continents in the corner and Great Britain has been made much larger in scale. When workers started doing regular maintenance at Camilla's private house, nobody thought they would find a hidden room sealed behind her son's bedroom wall. What they found was no ordinary discovery. It was a secret that held the weight of memory, sadness, and unresolved history. Well, there were 3 of us in this marriage. So it was a bit crowded. Inside the dust and shadows was something so personal, so haunting that it brought back pain, thought long forgotten. But what could possibly come out of the darkness that left even the royal family completely speechless? This is that shocking discovery. The day normal work became a huge revelation. What started as a routine inspection at Camilla's private house quickly turned into a revelation that threatened to shake the monarchy to its core. The day had started quietly, with workers moving from room to room, checking structural integrity, taking notes, and tapping along walls for the smallest signs of damage. Their job was simple: check for cracks, leaks, and hidden weaknesses that might over time hurt the safety of the property. Yet none of them could have predicted what they were about to find in the most unlikely of places: the bedroom belonging to Tom Parker Bowles, Camilla's oldest son. It started innocently enough. While checking one of the walls, a worker's attention was caught by a slightly uneven line hidden beneath layers of plaster and behind a decorative panel. At first glance, it seemed unimportant, the kind of irregularity expected in older homes where time leaves its marks in small cracks and fading paint. The assumption was that it was nothing more than the harmless scars of age. Yet something about this crack felt different, almost too on purpose, too carefully hidden. Curiosity led to a closer look. When a hand knocked gently against the surface, the sound that came back was not solid stone or brick, but a strange hollow vibration, as though the wall itself was hiding a space behind it. The workers looked at each other uneasily. This was no ordinary flaw. Something was hidden, deliberately tucked away in silence for decades. Rules said that nothing more should be touched until a higher authority could be called. Within minutes, a state security had been called, and soon after, palace officials arrived with strict instructions. The atmosphere changed from casual inspection to tense urgency. Guards stood by the door. The workers stepped back, and the once ordinary bedroom seemed to turn into a stage where history itself was about to perform an unexpected act. Under careful watch, the plaster around the irregular crack was chipped away. The room grew quiet, the air thick with anticipation. Each strike of the tool echoed like a drumbeat, as though the walls themselves fought against giving up their secret. And then at last the panel came loose and gave way, revealing the dark, dust-filled space hidden behind. What lay beyond was not the result of natural decay or forgotten renovations. This was no accident of time. It was something else entirely, a hiding place done with precision, buried with the plan to remain undiscovered. The space was narrow, claustrophobic, its stale air thick with the breath of decades long gone. Whoever had sealed it away had done so on purpose, making sure that its contents would never see the light of day without force. The officials looked into the opening, flashlights cutting through the darkness, and the workers naturally held their breath. They knew they had stumbled upon something amazing, something far beyond their original task. This was no mere hidden flaw of an old house. This was a secret purposefully buried in stone and plaster, waiting, perhaps even daring, to be found. The discovery left everyone uncomfortable because in that moment became clear they were not just dealing with old construction or forgotten renovations. They were standing at the edge of a mystery that carried the weight of purpose, secrecy, and perhaps even scandal. A secret long hidden behind Tom's wall now threatens to break the monarchy's silence. But what kind of truth was so dangerous it had to be buried away for decades? Now, let's uncover how a hidden passage revealed a chest sealed with dangerous secrets. The Corridor of Silence. When the final pieces of plaster fell away, the sight that met their eyes sent a wave of unease through the room. Behind the broken wall, hidden from view for decades, stretched a narrow corridor covered in dust and silence. The air that came out was heavy, stale, and suffocating, as though time itself had been trapped inside with no escape. Each step into that space felt less like a discovery and more like an intrusion into something deliberately meant to remain sealed away. This was no grand hallway designed for escape or safety, unlike the hidden routes often whispered about in royal history. There were no wide stone steps or elegant arches meant to carry kings and queens to safety. Instead, the corridor was cramped and suffocating, its walls pressing in with crushing weight, forcing those who entered to move carefully and with unease. It did not invite escape. It demanded silence. It was not a design of protection, but of hiding. The deeper they went into the narrow channel, the more disturbing it became. The dust stuck to their clothes and faces. Cobwebs stretched across corners like curtains of forgotten memories, and the faint movement of unseen insects echoed in the quiet. This was a place untouched by life for decades, perhaps longer, as though the world outside had moved forward while this room remained locked in a frozen, airless eternity. And then, at the farthest point of the corridor, the flashlight beams fell upon something that froze every breath in the air. There it stood. An iron-bound chest, short and solid, its wood warped by time yet still strong, its blackened iron bands holding onto it with the strength of centuries. Dust covered its surface in thick layers. Yet even beneath that coat of age, the chest carried an aura of purpose. It had not been left there carelessly, nor had it ended up there by chance. Its position was too exact, perfectly centered within the alcove, as though chosen deliberately. As though someone had placed it with care and purpose, making sure it would remain until its time of discovery arrived. The lock, though rusted, still shined faintly under the light, a quiet sign of its strength. Whoever had locked this chest had wanted it sealed, had wanted it to last. This was not junk discarded by history. It was not some forgotten trunk abandoned in the chaos of renovation. This was an object hidden with determination, kept with secrecy and left with purpose. The silence of the corridor seemed to grow louder, pressing on those who stood before the chest. The discovery did not feel like victory, but intrusion, as though they had broken into a room where secrets had been deliberately laid to rest, and where even the air whispered warnings not to disturb what had been buried. What secrets did this chest keep? Why had it been sealed so carefully, hidden so deeply, and left in a corridor designed not for escape, but for erasure? The questions swirled heavily in the minds of those present, each one more troubling than the last. This was no accident. This was a message, a burden from the past, waiting, perhaps unwillingly, to be dug up. The chest had not been waiting to be found. It had been waiting to be opened. But what lay inside? Was it jewels, forgotten family treasures, or something far more powerful, something that could change the future of the crown? Let's find out. When secrets replaced treasure, the air inside the narrow corridor had already been heavy with anticipation. But nothing compared to the silence that fell when the iron-bound chest was finally dragged into the open. Its weight alone suggested importance, its lock holding on with the determination of decades. As the final hinge groaned and the lid creaked upward, everyone in the room seemed to hold their breath. For a moment, there lingered the wild hope of jewels, gold, or priceless family treasures, treasures fit for a crown. Relics of a monarchy that had always covered itself in wealth and ceremony. But that hope was crushed in an instant. There were no sparkling jewels, crowns, or royal treasures to be found. Instead, nestled within the chest were stacks of papers tied with faded ribbons, whose colors had long turned to ghostly grays and pale blues. The paper was fragile, yellowed with age, and the ink had soaked softly into the fibers. At first, the discovery seemed almost ordinary, mere scraps of paper where riches had been expected. But the moment the handwriting appeared, unmistakably personal and deliberate, the air shifted from casual curiosity to stunned disbelief. The handwriting was instantly recognizable. It was her hand, Diana's. These were not carefully chosen letters written for public release, nor the polished remarks she had once allowed to be shared in interviews. These were something else entirely. Private journals, raw pieces of her unguarded truth. Each line pulsed with emotion. Each page whispered with confessions never meant to be read by strangers. The words carried no filter, no performance. They were the pure outpourings of a woman who had felt unseen and unheard inside the golden walls of royalty. The journals bled with honesty. There were passages filled with aching loneliness, words that painted vivid pictures of nights spent in silence where, even surrounded by luxury, she felt invisible. Other entries crackled with frustration and quiet defiance, as though she was writing against a world that refused to acknowledge her pain. And woven through it all was the haunting fear that her story, her very voice, would one day be silenced completely, buried beneath the weight of the crown and its relentless machinery of image and control. What made the discovery all the more devastating was the intimacy of the writing. These were not statements prepared for history books, nor legacies shaped for the future. They were letters to herself, words intended to exist only within the safety of secrecy. Yet here they were, hidden behind a wall in Camilla's son's bedroom, waiting silently for decades until fate forced them back into the light. For those present, the realization was staggering. They were not handling artifacts of wealth, but pieces of a soul. Each ribbon-bound stack represented pieces of Diana herself. Her voice, her pain, her truth, brought back to life in ink long after her passing. The air seemed charged with her presence, as though the room itself pulsed with the weight of what had been uncovered. This was no treasure of gold or jewels. This was far more dangerous, far more powerful. It was Diana's unfiltered voice, a voice that refused to be erased, and one that threatened to reshape everything the monarchy thought it had buried. Why was this secret uncovered in Tom's bedroom? And who is he? Could it be that the secret was always meant to be revealed through words, and that the man best placed to carry it forward is the one whose life revolves around them? Now, let's look into why Diana's words surfaced in the hands of Tom Parker Bowles. When fate chose a writer, what stunned both the palace and the public was not just the contents of the discovery, but its surprising location. This revelation did not come from a secret royal archive or a long-forgotten room in a centuries-old palace. Instead, it was hidden in the most personal and unexpected of places, behind the bedroom wall of Tom Parker Bowles, Camilla's oldest son. The intimacy of the setting made the find all the more shocking and deep. Tom has never carried the weight of royal titles, nor has he lived under the same suffocating spotlight of monarchy as William and Harry. He has remained an observer rather than a participant, connected to the royal world through bloodlines and circumstance, but carving out his own life in a very different world. His identity has always been tied to words, not crowns, first as a journalist, later as a food critic and author, and always as a man who built his career on language and storytelling. His career has been one of interpretation, of shaping truth into stories for the world to read. And perhaps that was the cruelest irony of all, striking with the force of lightning. Hidden within his own quarters, sealed behind layers of plaster and stone, lay words that defied expectation. These were not carefully edited articles or sentences crafted to please an audience. No, these were the raw, unguarded words of Diana herself. A voice unfiltered, unshaped, and fearless. For years, her truth had been held back, softened, and redirected by the weight of the institution around her. Yet now it spoke freely, impossible to ignore. For years, Diana herself had expressed a deep fear that her story, her real story, would one day be softened into myth or erased by official narratives. She worried out loud that the memory of her struggles, her passion for the marginalized, and her battles within the palace would be cleaned up into footnotes rather than preserved as they were truly lived. And now, decades later, her most private words, untouched and unshaped, had surfaced in the most unexpected hands. The son of the woman who replaced her in Charles's life. The twist was so striking, so loaded with meaning that few could accept it as pure coincidence. Diana's hidden voice did not surface in William's study, nor in Harry's distant home, but behind the walls of a man whose life revolved entirely around words and storytelling. People whispered that it was almost fate, as if destiny itself had made sure that her unfiltered truth would land in the hands of someone uniquely qualified to understand it, preserve it, and perhaps one day give it the life it deserved. For Tom, the discovery must have been confusing. He had built a life separate from the royal machine, often resisting being defined by his connection to Camilla. Yet now he found himself standing before the ghost of Diana, holding pages that could change not just his own family story, but the image of the monarchy itself. The symbolism was almost too perfect. Diana's voice, once muted by the crown, had risen in the quiet sanctuary of a writer. Tom Parker Bowles has become the unlikely keeper of a voice the palace once tried to silence. But what does this discovery truly mean for the monarchy? And how far will its echo reach? Now, let's unravel how Diana's words sparked panic, division, and reckoning. Whispers into wildfire. The revelation spread through the palace like a spark, catching dry wood, igniting whispers that refused to be contained. What had begun as a quiet, almost accidental discovery now moved with the force of a storm through hallways that had long thrived on discretion and silence. The air within Buckingham Palace and beyond grew heavy with unease. Because this was not simply another rumor or tabloid scandal that could be brushed aside with polished statements, this was different. This was real. This was Diana's own hand, her own voice reaching across decades to remind the monarchy of a truth it had tried to bury. Palace workers, normally so measured and composed, began to whisper in hushed tones that carried an unusual urgency. Should the contents of the chest be revealed, laid bare for the world to see in their raw and fragile honesty? Or should they be locked away again, destroyed if necessary? In the name of preserving the institution, the palace was no stranger to crisis management. Entire systems had been built to weather controversy, to shield the monarchy from the harshness of public scrutiny. But the discovery of Diana's private writings presented no easy solution. This was never gossip nor idle speculation, and certainly not the twisted tales spun by eager journalists chasing headlines. These were Diana's own words, raw, unfiltered, and totally undeniable. Within each page lay her deepest confessions. The crushing loneliness behind the public smile, the quiet fears of being forgotten, and the haunting certainty that her truth might one day be erased by the very institution she had devoted herself to. These writings were more than words. They were a heartbeat, a soul reaching across time to be heard. The implications shook the foundations of royal authority. Legal experts were called in to examine every possible angle. Could the writings be considered personal property of the late princess, and therefore belong to her sons? Or had they become, by strange circumstance, part of the monarchy's archives to be hidden, managed, or selectively shared at the discretion of the crown? There were no clear examples from the past, no simple answers. Every option carried risks, and each one seemed to pull the monarchy into deeper waters. Palace insiders whispered that King Charles carried the heaviest burden of all. This discovery hit him not merely as a challenge to the monarchy, but as a deeply personal confrontation with memory, raw, painful, and tangled. to see his late wife's private words coming back from behind the walls of his current wife's oldest son's bedroom was nearly unbearable. It felt as if the past had barged into his present, refusing to be ignored, demanding attention and shattering the fragile calm he had carefully tried to maintain for both himself and the crown. The monarchy had survived rumors before. It had survived endless speculation, harsh criticism, and scandals that seemed designed to test its strength. Yet rumors could be denied, dismissed, or drowned out. What it could not easily silence were Diana's words written in her own hand. Words that struck with the force of truth. And now those words had risen, not from archives or interviews, but from a hidden room in Camilla's son's private quarters. This revelation is a reckoning the monarchy cannot ignore. But how will William and Harry respond? Will they let it stay buried? Or will their actions give Diana's silenced voice the attention it demands? Now, let's explore how their divided grief awakened truths long hidden. Brothers divided yet bound by Diana's voice. For Princes William and Harry, the hidden discovery was never about politics, palace rules, or public image. It struck far deeper into the heart, the memories. And the wounds they carried, it was intensely personal, raw and unbearably heavy. In that moment, the weight of history, secrecy, and loss crashed together. And all they felt was the sharp pain of grief. The moment they learned that the chest contained their mother's private writings, the air seemed to shift. These were not carefully written public letters or statements shaped for sympathy. They were Diana's most vulnerable words, raw and unguarded, pulled straight from the depths of her heart. For her sons, reading them felt like stepping into a time capsule of their mother's voice. Honest, broken, hopeful, and afraid all at once. It was as if she had reached across time, speaking directly to them, bypassing the crown, the palace workers, and the history books. William, always cautious and protective of the monarchy's fragile reputation, immediately felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on him. He worried that if these deeply personal confessions ever reached the press, they would not be respected as their mother's truth, but ripped apart for headlines, sensationalized until their meaning was lost. To him, holding back felt like protection, a shield not just for the monarchy, but for Diana's dignity. He wanted to preserve her voice, not watch it be torn into tabloid spectacle. Harry, on the other hand, felt no such hesitation. Freed by distance, both literal and emotional, he was outraged. To him, the very fact that their mother's words had been hidden in Camilla's son's private quarters felt like betrayal piled upon betrayal. Diana had feared her voice would be silenced. And now, decades later, here was proof. For Harry, there was no time for caution. He demanded immediate transparency, insisting that her truth should not be controlled, filtered, or contained by the very institution that had often tried to bury it. Though their grief brought William and Harry together in shared sorrow, their instincts crashed with burning intensity. Long-buried wounds shaped by contrasting roles, life choices, and perspectives came back with undeniable force. William, bound by the weight of duty as heir, approached with caution and care. Harry, the free-spirited spare, demanded openness and truth. Both sought to honor their mother's memory. Yet their methods split completely, revealing a sad tension between responsibility and rebellion, tradition and freedom, love and loss. To outsiders, the rift between William and Harry appeared unfixable, a gap shaped by years of difference and diverging paths. Yet beneath the visible tension lay an undeniable reality, a bond forged by love and shared loss. Their mother's voice, once thought erased by time and circumstance, had come back. Those long-hidden words now called out with urgency and clarity, insisting that they be acknowledged, understood, and never silenced again. No matter their differences, neither William nor Harry could allow those words to be buried again. For them, this was not about power or politics. It was about love, memory, and justice for the woman who had given them both life and purpose. And in that moment, even in division, they carried the same promise. Diana's voice would live on. William and Harry promised their mother's voice would never be buried. But beyond her words, what keeps Diana alive in the hearts of the world forever? Let's find out. A legacy that refused to stay buried. Diana's rediscovered journals did not simply add a few hidden pages to the royal record. They reopened a chapter the monarchy had worked for decades to carefully close. What came out from behind the wall was not just paper, ink, and ribbons worn with time, but a voice that once shook the world and suddenly spoke again with startling clarity. For the royal family, it was not just a discovery. It was a reckoning. For years, Princess Diana had been remembered through images carefully preserved in public memory. The radiant humanitarian, the glamorous yet relatable princess, the woman who walked into AIDS wards when fear and stigma kept others away. She had been celebrated as a champion of the vulnerable, a mother whose devotion to William and Harry softened the harshness of royal protocol, and as a global icon who campaigned against landmines with unmatched courage. Her compassion defined her. Her empathy reshaped how the monarchy was seen, and her charitable work inspired millions across continents. But these journals revealed something deeper. The heart behind the public figure. The Diana who came out in these pages was not only the charitable princess the cameras loved, but also a woman who struggled with fears, who wrestled with invisibility, and who questioned whether her truth would ever survive beyond the palace walls. In fragile handwriting, sometimes shaky, sometimes sharp, she admitted her greatest fear, that her legacy would be softened, reshaped, or silenced by the very institution that had so often failed to hear her. This was not the Diana of glossy magazines or carefully edited interviews. This was Diana as she saw herself unguarded, raw, emotional, and totally human. In one passage, she reflected on her work with children, not in the language of headlines, but in confessions about the pain she carried home afterward. In another, she questioned whether her efforts to challenge stigma, whether about AIDS, homelessness, or mental health, would ever outlast the narratives of palace scandal. What the world had seen as strength was here revealed as both triumph and burden, victories, carved from loneliness and determination. And that is what made these journals so dangerous and so powerful. They gave Diana back her voice, not as a symbol created by others, but as a storyteller of her own life. Every faded ribbon that tied those pages seemed to unravel carefully crafted myths, reminding the world that Diana was not only a figure in history, but a woman who wanted to be remembered truthfully. For the royal family, this was the shock. Her voice had not disappeared, nor could it be controlled. It had returned, most unexpectedly, dug up from behind the bedroom wall of Tom Parker Bowles, Camilla's oldest son. The irony was impossible to ignore. A woman who feared her words would be hidden forever was now speaking again from a place so closely tied to the woman long accused of overshadowing her memory. It was no wonder that the discovery left the palace reeling. These were not treasures that could be locked away, nor relics to be displayed. They were confessions alive with the power to change how Diana was remembered. Not as myth, not as memory, but as voice. A voice unyielding, a voice undeniable, a voice impossible to silence again. And that, above all, is why what they found behind Camilla's son's bedroom wall did not merely surprise the royal family. It left them speechless. What do you think lies ahead for the monarchy now that Diana's voice rises? We would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like and subscribe.